The Joe Rogan Experience.
When I was stationed at Portland Air National Guard, my job there was an airfield manager. So I would interface and work a lot with the F-15 pilots at the unit. And so there had been an airspace incursion that had taken place when I was still at the time at the Guard. And I remember kind of talking to some of the pilots about it. And I was like, what was that? And they're like, we can't really talk about it. No one really wanted to address it. And so from what I'd gathered, that had been likely a UAP. And so that kind of was my perspective. Granted, I also grew up in the generation of the X-Files and, I don't know if you remember 94 Independence Day. So like for me specifically, I didn't look at it with like a crazy lens and perspective. I'm like, you never know if, we're the only ones out there essentially.
But why did you assume that if it's a top secret incursion that he couldn't talk about, that it wasn't just a military craft from another country?
Because of the way that he was discussing it.
What did he say?
So he had been, he didn't want to, from what I gather, get taken off flight status. And he's like, I really can't discuss it. We couldn't really identify it essentially. And it had outperformed them. And so that was my first, from a military perspective, kind of experience with someone who basically, there's a stigma within the flight community. Do you want to lose your security clearance? Is there this level of crazy that people kind of brand that will stick with you and kind of ruin your career?
But doesn't he have instrumentation on his jet?
Well, at the time, right? So it's an older platform, but he really didn't want to even talk about it. And I bring that up because now with our investigation and the task force that I run, actually the reason why the task force was formed was because of an event that happened at Eglin Air Force Base where both myself, Representative Matt Gaetz, and Representative Tim Burchett actually had responded and gone to investigate multiple Air Force pilots that had come forward in regards to UAP incidences that had occurred. And they were alleging that the Air Force was covering it up.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was that. And I'm happy to go into detail on that one. But what I will tell you is the stuff that I saw at Eglin, how the military responded, me being, a former service member, and then ultimately what I saw with the pushback of the military not even wanting to share with Congress information, which is a big problem because when you have Congress that's supposed to be the advocate and voice for the American people, the oversight body, and you're being denied access, not just from a base commander, but high level up at the Pentagon, even Secretary of Defense, it's a problem.
Do you think that it's possible that these are U.S. vehicles that are top secret?
I definitely think that there's a level of advanced technology that the U.S. government has. And I think that tech can be housed within the defense contractor realm. And of course, some information is going to be classified. But I can also tell you, and this might sound crazy, but based on our investigations and stuff that we've seen, okay, there is definitely something that I think would rival what we know currently with physics, and a tech that potentially is out there that we don't have the ability to reproduce, because it would basically be like dropping a cell phone right off back during the time of maybe caveman. So we just don't have the tech to develop it yet. What I can also tell you is based on our interviews, and this has been something that you can go back and watch with the congressional hearings, but I was actually able to ask some of the witnesses, what are these things? And they keep saying interdimensional. And then when you talk about the interdimensional aspect of, are these things pre-existing, maybe outside of what we currently know as our own dimension? That stuff can kind of all sound crazy, but at the end of the day, my job as an investigator is to receive all the information, decipher it, and then ultimately from a congressional aspect, if you do have contractors that are withholding information or operating outside of the purview of the federal government, there's budgetary issues, but there's definitely something that I can tell you with confidence that exists that we don't know how to explain currently.
So when you say that it operates outside our understanding of physics, what specifically are you saying? What happened?
To I guess break it down in simple terms is that I think that some of the tech that exists, that whatever these things have, these energy things have.
Energy things? What do you mean?
Well, they call them interdimensional beings. I think that they can actually operate through the time spaces that we currently have. And that's not something that I came up with on my own. That's based on stuff that we've seen. That's based on information that we've been told. And then also, too, I think that there's this historical aspect of, this gets into the deeper theories and concepts of religion. And I think the history that we currently know, and that kind of spins off into another topic of, you have the modern day Bible, you have this aspect of Bibles or books of the Bible that have been removed that explain and kind of touch on these topics. And I think that we're in a time and age where you have such a vast amount of information that we have access to via social media, via your cell phone, via the internet. And so it's really changing the way that we understand, the origins of life and the spiritual reality that we know.
When you
currently.
say interdimensional beings, that they know that these are interdimensional beings, how do they know that?
Based on testimony, would be based on witnesses that have come forward. But what I can tell you
So the
is
witnesses just were told that they were
No,
interdimensional?
that they've seen things. And what I can tell you without getting into classified conversations is that there have been incidences that I believe where very credible people have reported that there have been movement outside of time and space.
That's very vague.
Yeah. So, look.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Look, have I seen a portal open? No. Have I seen a spaceship? Personally, no. Have I seen evidence of this? Yes. Have I seen photo documentation of aircraft that I believe were not made by mankind? Yes. Is there historical significance to this? Yes. Is there multiple events that go back to, I would argue, maybe even before the time of Christ that have documented this in text? Yes. So do I believe that the government has access to certain technology? Yes, to an extent. And I believe that certain contractors potentially have back engineered this tech. I think that that's what can explain the advancements that we're seeing. But I also believe that this is a dangerous level of hidden information from the American people, because if you have an aspect of the federal government, which I can tell you, I, with two other members of Congress, were denied access to information at Eglin Air Force Base pertaining to whistleblowers because of the fact, and we can get into that story and what happened at Eglin in a second, but we were denied access and told that we don't have security clearance or the read-in authority on a special access program. That's a problem, because I'm supposed to represent and be an investigative body, and you have then people who are unelected that are operating basically in secrecy, and that's a problem. That's a big problem.
And so how do these people have the authority to do that?
I think it's been decades of classified secret information, then also this aspect of the intelligence community that's been empowered. And it's kind of serendipitous with timing, because when you talk about the intelligence communities and what they've done essentially to the trust in this country with the American people, I think this goes all the way back even into JFK, with how they basically have operated outside of the purview of Congress and basically to an extent have gone rogue up until recently. You're seeing a big push and pull to try to rein in these intelligence agencies currently.
Yeah. So what I want to bring it back to evidence. You said that you've seen evidence. Like, what kind of evidence have you seen?
I have seen photos. I have seen...
what have you seen photos of?
So I was in a skiff, and I can't discuss all that was in a skiff, but what I can tell you is based on the photos that I've seen, I'm very confident that there's things out there that have not been created by mankind.
It seems crazy that people have access to information that shows that there's something outside of us that is more intelligent, at least more capable than we are, and they hide it from everybody else.
What I can tell you is that when you have thousands upon thousands of people around the planet throughout time that have reported something.
Right.
To say that those people are crazy, to say that, the whole concept of even just asking the question that you might not necessarily be psychologically sound, that in itself, that's a disinformation campaign to get people to shut up about it. And that's a problem. We know that the U.S. government has not exactly been clean, and a lot of what they've done with the American people, specifically to the topic of UFOs.
Which makes you think that it's probably because there's something there. If you think about the motivation they had with Project Blue Book, when J. Allen Hynek was running Project Blue Book, this specific intention was to discredit all stories.
And he ended up ultimately, though, after all of his investigations, becoming someone that was like, I think there's something here. But that's true. By the way, a lot of people might not necessarily go onto Google and look up that information, but you can actually look up the declassified reports from Project Blue Book. What's also interesting, though, is when we're talking about tech, right, the ability for this tech, being that it exists, to change dependence for entire governments on things like fossil fuel, et cetera, it's look, I think everyone has a moral obligation to do what they think is right. Okay. And so if you're in a position of power and you see something wrong and you're not addressing it, I think, this in itself, getting the truth out there for people to decide for themselves. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm just telling you in our investigations and what we are pushing for in regards to transparency. I would like to see the federal government roll out some of the stuff that we've been given access to, because I think that information belongs in the hands of the American people. And it's not even just the U.S. government. I mean, there's other countries around the world that have done certain things like this. Now, look, I've had a lot of crazy people show up at my office and say, I've heard it all. Yeah, I've been to Mars. I have a chip in my brain, all this stuff.
They all have chips.
We had this one guy that showed up that was trying to give us a USB. He's like, put this in your computer. They're going to kill me for this. And runs away. And I'm like, I'm not putting that in my computer. But based on our investigations, what I will tell you is, there's been 2 members of Congress that are actually helping to lead out these investigations with me. And the reason I say that is because up until last Congress, if you even said the word UAP or UFO, people actually told us that if we went forward with these investigations that we were going to ruin our political careers. And so, we're in the mindset of, well, why wouldn't we ask these questions? And also, too, if no one wants to touch it, there has to be something here, right?
Right.
And so in these investigations, I mean, the amount of people that will come up to us, very successful people, to multiple members of Congress that believe the same thing, it's definitely changed in regards to the stigma that used to exist about disclosure and all this. And so what we're trying to do currently there's a big documentary that was filmed about a year and a half ago, and we're trying to get a screening up on Capitol Hill. But look, I think a lot of people say, well, this is a distraction from everything else happening in the country right now. And all I'm simply trying to say is it's not a distraction. The people that are kind of helping to divulge all this information. You have an intelligence community, Tulsi Gabbard, Radcliffe, Kash Patel. They have been truly, in regards to our other investigations, extremely transparent and wanting to get this information out. But it doesn't mean that within these intelligence communities there isn't pushback. And so part of the reason why the task force was formed pertaining to things like UAP, pertaining to things like the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, pertaining to things like the JFK, MLK, and RFK investigations is because even though we don't hold declassification authority, what we're trying to do is push these agencies and be, if you will, the pit bull and the attack dog on trying to get this information released. And to a lot of these agencies' credits, they've been extremely transparent, and we have gotten wins specifically on the JFK stuff, and we're still looking to declassify and ask specifically on the UAP topic.
What would be the rationale for keeping a photograph of a known absolute not of this world craft from the American people or from the world? Why would anybody think that would be the smart thing to do, is to limit the access of that information to a very small amount of people?
I think that part of the fear is that you have advisors that think that, the American people or humanity might not be able to handle it. There's this protective complex. But then also, too, I think when you are talking about these things, for a lot of people, I think that it kind of can rock your world a little bit in regards to where you stand in a faith perspective. And then also, too, an aspect of, well, how do you even begin to explain it? And all I'm going to say is, look, and we can go into some of the books that were removed from what we know as the modern day Bible, but I read through the book of Enoch multiple times. And I'm not saying that these things are angels. Okay, that's not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that depending on where you are in regards to your whole perspective on whether or not God exists, I believe in God, I'm a Christian. There has to have been, and there's admissions that there was other creations that God made, but that we were the most prized creation. And so I think that this can open up a bigger topic of discussion.